Directives are one of the reasons that I got into Angular. Not because the syntax of directives is pretty bad, but because of what directives can do for you. They can componentize your UI and make it easier to reuse and maintain UI elements. Really good stuff. So before I get into taking our app that we've already created and turning some of its elements into directives, let me just start out with some simple stuff just to get you going with directives, and we'll start from there. Okay, let's create a new directory. Create a simple file. Bring that up in Sublime. Let's go and open that. Bring it over into the browser. Okay. So let's bring in a simple Angular template and then add an app. And let's create a simple directive. This starts by calling the directive method on the module. You give it two parameters, the name of the directive and the function that creates it. Just like other things, you can add scopes and things like that, or other dependencies that you need. This function then in turn returns a structure, contains some simple information about directive, the template, and so on. Well, let's just first make sure the page works. Okay, so let's create a template in there, and then invoke it. Nope, not working. So what's wrong here? Let's try this. Now that works. Okay, so what's going on here? So as it turns out, there are three ways to invoke a directive. Originally, I invoked it like an element, hello, as just the tag name. Now I'm doing it as an attribute. You can also do it as a CSS selector. I'm not going to go into that here. By default, a directive is restricted to being invoked by attribute. To make it work as an element, I can just add a new restriction to just have it be by element. So in this case, E for element. Let's save, refresh, and now it's gone. But if I do this, it's back. Nice, right? Now this template can be as complex as I like. Easy peasy. I can also make it either an element or an attribute or a class. I'm putting in A, in this case, for element and then attribute. So in this case, that works, but also close that off. That works as well. Now we have two highs. Make that a little bigger. All right, the next thing we can do is play with where templates are. You might have a very complex template. So let's have a look in here, directives. I could go and take this template, create a new file called hello.html. And it doesn't work because I'm loading the file off the file system. As you can see by this error, failed to load template hello.html. So to fix that, I could use a simple web server and then go to localhost 8000. And great, we have our template back. Okay, so another way to do this is to use a template text inside of a script tag. And this also works, but you notice that we don't actually go and get the hello HTML. It's coming out of this template. That's nice if you want to keep things local. If you want to load really fast, this avoids doing an AJAX fetch of the template. Okay, so how do we pass stuff into a directive, and what does scope mean in a directive? So it turns out directives have their own dedicated scope. So let's move the template stuff back into the directive and define a scope variable called name. Get rid of that. Add a comma. Send that back to template. Okay, great. So now what we can do is we can say, hello, name equals Jack. Great. So what's with the @ symbol anyway? The @ symbol means literal, like the string Jack. There's also an equal sign, which means that you're bidirectionally binding yourself to another variable in the host scope. There's an ampersand, which indicates a callback, and will be used for implementing something like ng-click. We'll get to that when we wrap third-party controls in section 7. But let's look at what the equal sign means and work through that because it's pretty important. So we'll change that to an equal sign. We'll create a new controller. We'll connect this to controller. And now we'll bind name1 to name. Oops, I forgot to put the dollar on scope. And that works great. Create a second name. And just to show you that these two are actually dynamically binding, so it's bidirectional. Cool, right? Really nice. Now let's move this into the element. Let's also show what it looks like out here. So you can see you can change it from within the scope or change it from outside the scope, and it's bidirectionally coupled between the two. Okay, so one last thing. How do we get the scope to add methods and callbacks and stuff like that inside the directive itself? So what we want to do is investigate the link function. The link function takes 3 arguments. The first is the scope, the second is the element, and the third are the attributes. I'm just going to use scope here. So we can create a new thing, scope.high equals callback. And then from within here, we'll create a button. So now when we click on that, we're calling the scope high function, which is alerting the scope name, which is different depending on the directive that it's connected to. All right, so this is my introduction to basic Angular directive stuff. It gets you started, and what we'll do in the next section is show how to take the existing code that's in our to-do list application and turn it into directives. But for the moment, let's just get rid of this stuff and get back to our main app.